The Lord has promised good to me. His words my hopes secures. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has set me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has set me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow. The sun forbid to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine. Will be forever mine. You are forever mine. Amen.
Once again, happy Sabbath. And now is the turn for Pastor Rico. He's no stranger for us, right? He's a professor from Southwestern College, right? He also been a pastor from North Valley. And it's a privilege that he's here with us. You turn. Thank you for coming, Pastor.
Moment. Okay. Now we got some sound. Awesome. Good evening again. It's so great to be back and to be here. Good to see all of you. Familiar faces as well. It's just a blessing be able to share. I'm going to be removing my mask today so that the camera will be able to recognize a face and will be able to follow me wherever I go. Tonight, we're going to be moving on in understanding our central or the second half of the book of Daniel, and especially chapter 8. And we're going to try to make connections for chapter 9, which will be tomorrow, especially tomorrow morning. And then in the afternoon, we're going to try to move into chapter 10 and see what the Lord has in store for all of us. So let us do just a quick review from yesterday, from last night, so that we can get a little bit of a refresh in our minds, and then we can move forward into the rest. So I don't know if could I just move this a little this way so that I don't have to be moving all the way there. Okay. That'll be great. That's fine. Just in the center so that everybody will be able to see both sides of the... Is this good for everybody to be able to see the two sides of the screens? All right, good. A little more? All right. A little more. Perfect. Good. Awesome. Awesome. Good. So, yesterday we were looking into the structured, how Daniel was composed. We were able to see the two halves of the book, how the chapters were connected, and especially how chapter 1 was serving as an umbrella to help us now see that chapter 1 encompasses the whole book of Daniel. Then we got a little into chapter 8. And what I'd like to do today, let me take you back, and if I can get your attention to the board for just a moment, then we're going to move back into the PowerPoint. We're going to be doing both so that we can kind of get, the picture a little bit better. In chapter 8, you will remember that when Daniel receives this vision, it's still in the days of Babylon, but there is no symbol given for Babylon. Okay? That's not how the vision begins. The vision begins now with a ram. And then it is followed by a he-goat. And then, now there is a change. Because Daniel is going to see a little horn, and this little horn will then grow exceedingly, okay? And it's going to be the only symbol for the next two powers that do follow the goat. And then, after that, now, after seeing the images of these beasts and this little horn and the activities that they're doing, now the vision changes from images to voices, to sounds. And now Daniel's attention is attracted by the conversation of two holy ones. At least that's the biblical description. Two individuals are conversing. And one is asking Daniel. Actually, one is asking the other one, until when this little horn will be doing whatever, and something is done about it. And then the answer is until 2,300 evenings and mornings. And then the sanctuary will be cleansed. So now we have an act of cleansing that takes place. And as we looked yesterday, this is the central element within the vision. And there is no symbol for the kingdom. So now that's what we have in Daniel 8. And there were a couple of questions left and answered from last night. But before we address two domestic animals, more precisely, sacrificial animals. And if you still want to be a little bit more detailed, these are animals that were employed for one specific ceremonial, one specific service. That was the Day of Atonement. So now, when we see this, we can now see that the emphasis that is being projected is not necessarily on the rise and fall of nations, like Daniel 7 was, like Daniel 2 was, but now what's going to happen is that God is going to tell us, within this rise and fall of nations, now someone will have to put an end to whatever unfairness, unrighteousness has been conducted. And that can only be done whenever. Why the emphasis, or why the vision encompasses, beginning with the ram and ending with the sanctuary, and that's all that we have in chapter 8. Now, let us remember, Daniel did identify these two powers. And if you remember those, the top one is Medo and Persia, followed by Greece. He doesn't identify the next two, but he describes the activities. But we don't really have to go too far to find out that after Greece, the next kingdom that arose was Rome. And then after Rome, the next power that dominated the world was papal Rome. So that's what we have. But now Daniel's attention is more arrested right here about that little horn. Why is Daniel so interested, so attracted to this little horn? Why not the previous animals or the previous powers? And the only reason is for the type of activities that this little horn was doing. If you go back to Daniel 8 and you begin reading in verses 8 or 9 and following, you're going to see a few things that this power is doing. And actually, why don't we do a little reading here? If you got your Bibles with you, will you turn them over to Daniel chapter 8, please? Daniel 8. And then beginning in verse, let me see if I can get, is it 9? Yes, beginning in verse 9. Notice some of the activities. This power arose in history. And notice what it does. It grew exceedingly toward the south, toward the east, and to impose itself over heavenly realities. But then it continues. Verse 11. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the hosts. So now he is moving against the prince of the hosts. So he is attacking the host, and now he's attacking the prince. Who happens to be the prince? Now, you can get an idea. In the book of Daniel, you can see something similar in Ezekiel. There is a distinction between prince and king. Though for us, there might not be much of a distinction, much of a difference, in biblical categories, they do make a distinction. You will notice that the term king will be assigned to a human earthly monarch, like Nebuchadnezzar, like Darius, Cyrus, and some of the others. But whenever the term prince is employed, it is not in reference to a human earthly monarch, but is employed in reference to a spiritual reality. Now, you want an example of that? You can check Ezekiel chapter 28. We will read also Daniel chapter 9 and Daniel chapter 10. where the term prince appears more than once. And by the context, you can clearly see it's not referring to a human king. It's referring to someone outside of this planet Earth. Are you following what I'm saying? So then, this little horn, obviously, he is not attacking another human prince, another earthly entity. He is attacking someone outside of this world. And this prince, we will see in chapter 9 and in chapter 10, it is Jesus. Okay? So now, by exalting himself up to the prince of the hosts, what are the intentions of the little horn? What is it that he wants to accomplish? Basically, he wants to take the place of the Prince of Hosts on earth. He wants to replace, he wants to supplant God on earth. So, if you want to call this little horn a wannabe God, you may not be too far from reality. Okay? So now Daniel is listening to all of this. Okay? And he's becoming completely shocked. Wait a minute. How can someone try to take God's place on earth? Which, by the way, if you read Daniel's chapter 1, 2 through 4, you will notice that Nebuchadnezzar attempted the same. And God ended up humbling Nebuchadnezzar to the ground. Because no one can take the place of God on earth. So now, what Nebuchadnezzar was not able to accomplish, now the little horn is going to try to do. Now, as you look at that, also keep in mind the background we called great controversy. Who is behind all of these activities? Who was behind Nebuchadnezzar? Who is behind this little horn? Okay, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. And this is why in Daniel, you're not going to read so much about the name of God, Yahweh, but you're going to read about Michael. And why is it that the name of Michael is mentioned more than the name of Yahweh? That's very important. Because there is a conflict. This is why last night I introduced you to the first chapter, the very first 2 verses, so we can see that great controversy in action. And now we can see why then, instead of using the name of Yahweh in Daniel, we have the name of Michael. And what's the name Michael? What is that supposed to mean? We will amplify it tomorrow afternoon. So stay tuned. But let me give you just a little foretaste. It's not just simply saying, who like God? That's the meaning of the name. Who like God? But why is that name? That name is a question. And a question could normally become a challenge. But the question is, who is Michael trying to challenge? With the name, who like God? Who can be like God? Only God himself. Correct? So then, who is he trying to challenge? Who like God? So he's challenging someone who wanted it to be like God. Who was that? Remember Isaiah chapter 14, verse 14? How this morning star fell down, then wanted it to ascend and establish his throne up in the holy mount, and he wanted it to be like the Most High. And now Michael comes in and he says, who like God? And who can be like God? Only God himself. So this is the whole great controversy. So what now the devil attempted to accomplish, now he's using human entities to reach it. Nebuchadnezzar, and now the little horn. And now Daniel is totally shocked. But then there is one more thing in the activities of this little horn. There's one more thing. And if you continue reading, there in verse 11, not only he exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, but also by him the daily was taken away, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. The daily was removed, and the sanctuary is cast down. Now, I want you to notice one thing. When you read chapter 8, verse 11, if you go back to your Bibles, whatever rendering you are using, whatever translation you are using, okay, it will normally tell you that the daily sacrifice was removed, was taken away. Does it say that in your Bibles? Now, notice another thing. Your word daily appears there in print, bold print. But the word sacrifice is in cursive. Notice that difference? Why is the word sacrifice in cursive as opposed to the other? Because the word sacrifice is not in the original. The translator thought that that's what was meant by the removal of the daily, because he was just thinking about the daily sacrifices. And as a result, the word was added. Whenever you see in your Bible words that are in cursive, it's because it's been added with the intent of helping the reader get a broader picture. But unfortunately, whenever we do not know that the word has been added, misunderstandings will develop from there. Why? Because when you read daily sacrifice, what comes to your mind? Just a ritual that was taking place in the temple, in the sanctuary, on a daily basis, and that was it. And when Jesus died on the cross, then why do we need the Old Testament anymore? Are you following? So even when the translator did not have any other intentions, the devil knows how to use things. And so we will see why it is important in just a moment. Understand that the word sacrifice is not there. It's only the word daily. We will see that in a moment. So based on all of these activities, now Daniel is beginning to wonder, okay, is someone doing anything about it? Is God going to do anything about it? Who's going to stop this power? And that's when the scenes in the vision switched from actions, from images into sounds, voices. And then there is a conversation between two holy ones, two angels. And one is asking, like reading Daniel's mind, until when this is going to continue? And the answer is until 2,300 evenings and mornings. And that until adverb will tell us that this is a time clause that is indicating to Daniel that this is going to continue and God is going to allow it until 2,300 evenings and mornings are accomplished. And then when that time ends, that's when God begins to work. And Daniel couldn't take it. He couldn't understand it. And he got sick. Now, why is it that Daniel was totally affected by that answer? Let me get your attention to the screens. Are you all able to see either side of the screen? Perfect. So let us begin by looking at after the Greek Empire fulfills its course in life and falls, then there is a new power. We're able to see that new now displays arrogance, displays intelligence. So we're saying that this is not just a regular individual, it's an entity that has some power. But now, the greatest that this system does is attempting to remove the daily. Why is that? For one, the word daily, as you see it on the screen and as you read your Bibles, comes from the which you see it on the screen. I'm providing that word. You may be saying, so why should I know this? I'm not a scholar. Why should I know this? Let me tell you why. The word tamid, when you take a concordance and you try to trace the occurrence of that word in the Old Testament, you're going to find the word is connected to one element. First of all, the term daily has more deeper meaning. As you can see, it refers to something that is on a continuous basis. It continues on. It refers to something that it remains there evermore. It refers to something that is more of a perpetual nature. So it's not just simply something that happens in a daily time. Okay? Now, how is this word connected? How is this word connected? When you do your diligent work of tracing the usage of this word in the Old Testament, you're going to find that is so connected with the entire sanctuary. That is to say, and I'm giving you some references, they're not the only ones, but there are some. The word Hamid is connected to the altar of sacrifice. That piece of furnishing, okay, from where the sacrifices were done. It is also connected to the table of showbread. It is also connected to the candlestick, the 7-branch candlestick. It's also connected to the altar of incense. Okay? And it is also connected to the Ark of Covenant. And if you continue reading, the priestly garments also had the word Tamid connected to them. So then, what does it mean by attempting to remove? What was this little horn trying to do? Just trying to stop sacrifices, animal sacrifices? Was that it? No. And this is why Daniel's attention was so arrested and he was so shocked about it, because the intent of this system was to remove anything and everything that was related to the sanctuary. And why is the sanctuary so important? If you ask an evangelical or a Protestant brother or sister, they may tell you, Old Testament sanctuary, oh, yeah, the place where Israel worshiped God. And that's the best that they can make out of it. But someone like yourself, who digs a little deeper into the scriptures, will find that the sanctuary is more than just a place for worship of God. When you look at the building of the sanctuary, you can begin reading in Exodus chapter 25, verses 8 and 9, when God instructed Moses, let them build me a sanctuary, and the whole reason was that I may dwell among them. Now, let us pause for a moment and understand that phrase right there. God is asking a sanctuary to be built so that he may dwell among his people. Does that mean that then God was not dwelling among them before? Does that mean then that God was not with them before? Or does that mean that there was a time when God was with them and then God separated from them and now he wants to come back? Are you following the reasoning? So that's telling us right there that there was a time when God and man were together, were connected. Where was this? In Eden. Genesis 2, Genesis 3. Okay? And they were able to speak face to face and relate face to face. What happened once sin entered? Now there is a separation. And that separation implied many things. Because before they were naked and they didn't feel ashamed of, now they see themselves naked and they feel ashamed of. So something was lost, right? Something was lost. What was it that was lost? And that's where you begin reading in the scriptures. Psalms 8. David will tell you, what is man that you can think of him, can even consider him. You made him. You clothed him with his glory. Man was naked, but man was covered by God. But then after sin, that glory was lost. No wonder Paul says in Romans chapter 3, for all have sinned, and they have all fallen short of God's glory. Now, this is Paul reading the scriptures. He's reading his Old Testament, and he is interpreting his Old Testament. Where did Paul get that from? Psalms 8, he must have read Genesis 3 to give us that conclusion. Are you following? So now, man in the sanctuary, man in the garden had the presence of God on a continuous basis. Man removed from Eden, now man doesn't have access to the source of life anymore. So now man goes from place to place as a pilgrim. God follows him. That they can say, this is it. This is where I'm going to meet, and God is going to come with me. So throughout the whole patriarchal time, you will see Abraham hopping, if you want to call it that way, from one place to another place, building an altar here, building an altar there, worshiping God, but not having one place that is fully dedicated to the Lord. Isaac, Jacob, and some of the others, throughout the whole patriarchal time, there was not a definite place. The first definite place comes in Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. When God took Israel out of Egypt, God decided, if this is going to be my kingdom of priests, my special treasure, then I'm going to be with them. And so he instructed the building of the sanctuary. But number two, that construction of the sanctuary was not to be made according to Moses' genealogy, but it was supposed to be made according to what God was showing him, which automatically tells us that there must have been an original shown to Moses, from which Moses drafted a replica. So now, what is it that was there in that sanctuary that Moses had to do it according to what God has shown him? So now the sanctuary becomes, if you want to call it that way, some people may not like it, but that's the best way I can describe it. The sanctuary becomes like a theater for the universe. And some people may not like the use of the term theater, but that's the best way I can describe it. And I'll tell you why in a moment. I'll tell you why. In the sanctuary, whatever goes on in the sanctuary is only a dramatization of two main events. First event, a dramatization of the whole plan of redemption. It was being acted out by the priest who takes that little lamb, sacrifices the lamb, takes the blood, brings it inside the sanctuary, comes out again, and then once a year, similar process. But then, in the end, the blood is placed on the head of a living goat. So the whole process of redemption is being dramatized in the sanctuary. Number one event. Number two event. In addition to the plan of redemption being acted out, the end of sin acted out. How God puts an end to the problem of sin, and how God puts an end to the culprit for the sins of the world. Those two events were dramatized. Now, can you understand why I call it theater? When you go to a theater, what do you go for? You go and watch some dramas, right? So, God decided we also need to watch some drama. But this is a drama us about our condition and about our situation with heaven. So when this whole little horn is trying to remove the daily, what is he trying to do? He's trying to remove everything that the sanctuary was representing. So that people will not be able to understand the whole plan of redemption. People will not be able to understand how this problem of sin will end. Are you following? Does it end there? No. It does not end there. Because in addition to God dramatizing those two main events, God is also using furnishings in that sanctuary. Altar of sacrifice, laver, table of showbread, 7-branch candlestick, altar of incense, Ark of Covenant. What were they there for? Just so that the sanctuary will not look empty? Just occupying a little space there to make it look prettier? Or what were those furnishings for? Did they have any meaning? Of course. So not only God was providing a dramatization of this whole process we call redemption, but at the same time, he was symbolizing details within this plan of redemption that we may be able to get the whole picture of what God is attempting to do. What was the altar sacrifice supposed to be representing? It was pointing to the cross. Correct. What was the 7-branch candlestick supposed to be representing? Well, it was supposed to be lit 7/24. And the light was being fed by olive oil. Why olive oil? Why not something else? Because the olive oil represents the Holy Spirit and the light of the world. So now those who see the altar of sacrifice and see Jesus being sacrificed will also see that Jesus is the light of the world. But the interesting thing is that those who see Jesus sacrifice and accept Jesus sacrifice will also have to become the light of the world. Didn't Jesus say in Matthew 5, you are the light of the world? So now, what is the little horn attempted? Not only removing from our sight the comprehension of the whole plan of redemption, but it's also trying to remove all those details that are being provided through the different pieces of furniture that are in there. So, was this an attempt on the part of the little horn? And obviously, this is not just a little horn acting, but there is someone else behind. So now, here's my little conclusion. The removal of the daily then indicates that the little horn wants to substitute God's plan of redemption as dramatized in the sanctuary and as illustrated through the furnishings. He wants to substitute and establish its own system. So far, so good? Can we understand why Daniel is totally appalled? He just can't believe it. He just can't take it. To the point that he even got sick. Okay? Now, why is it that, and I'm sorry if I referred more often to our evangelical and Protestant brothers and sisters. They have decided that the sanctuary was only for the Israelites, and that was their system of worship. And that once Jesus came, we don't need that. And that the Old Testament is for the Jews. And that we're only Christians of the New Testament. What are they missing out? By doing that, what are they missing out? This whole sanctuary dramatization. Why are they missing it out? Because when you read Paul in Hebrews calling Jesus our high priest, who is in the sanctuary and who is working, preparing a place for us, they're not able to understand what Jesus is doing and why is Jesus being compared to or called a high priest. And the only reason why Paul calls Jesus in such a unique way high priest is because he wants us to go back to the Old Testament, understand the work of the high priest in the sanctuary, so that we now can understand what Jesus is doing up in heaven. And this Daniel 8 is helping us see. So far, so good? Any questions? So this is just beyond meaning of symbols, things like that. It really has to deal with our relationship with the Lord. Brother? Why? You know, honestly, I don't think I have a complete answer as to why they're trying to build a temple there. But I can tell you that the act of building a temple there, there in no way will help them understand all of this message. They will still be missing Why? Because they saw the temple only as a place to understand how Israel worshiped God, and that was it. They didn't see any more meaning in it. So they would still be missing out that information there. You know, honestly, I don't know. I haven't made that connection. It is possible, but to be honest, I don't know exactly why they're doing it, but that's what's going on. And obviously, it's going to be a major enterprise to do that. It's going to be a major one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could be another reason for that. That's right. All right. So now the little horn is also persecuting the righteous. Please. Yeah. Basically, and basically that would be the bottom line. Without realizing it, that would be bottom line. That's correct. Few more things. That little horn is to remain to the end as the only power who will be standing against God and against his people towards the time of the end. And no other power will succeed it. And it is Satan's end time great instrument to confuse and at the same time persecute. So Daniel is quite shocked on all this. Now, let me move from here a little faster, because I want to take you to where we have the conversation. Let me move a little faster here. Sorry. Okay. So as I mentioned, the vision now changes from sights to sounds. And there is a conversation that is going on. And the question is, until when? The vision of the daily. Again, the term sacrifice is not in the original, because daily refers to everything that is included in the sanctuary. Until then, that vision of the daily and the sand causing desolation surrendered, and the sanctuary and the host being trampled. Until when this little horn will be doing all these kinds of things? That's the question. And the answer will then be given. But as you look at the question, you're going to see that that question is actually a rejection to the activities of the little horn. It helps us see that the little horn is not a positive entity, it is a negative entity. It's not serving God, it is opposing God. It's not sustaining God's people, it is attacking God's people. Not a positive, it's a negative. So here's the answer now. Here's the answer. Until when that little horn will be allowed to trample the sanctuary and the host? And the answer is until 2300 evenings and mornings. The word days does not appear there. Then the sanctuary will be cleansed. The question is, which sanctuary will be cleansed? So that's where we now begin to look into the answer that is provided to us. What are those 2,300 evenings and mornings? Why the phrase evenings and mornings? Remember that we mentioned it's a creation phrase, which then helps us see that whatever is going to be taking place in this sanctuary, it has to begin with whatever happened in the beginning. And it's going to move through history. And that's not going to take place in a year, 2 years, 3 years. So that automatically tells Daniel this is beyond his time. Number 2, which sanctuary needed to be cleansed? Because in Daniel's time, the temple had been destroyed. No sacrifices were being made for several years already. No services had been conducted for many years either. So there's got to be another sanctuary. Which is that sanctuary? And that's where we need to go back to Exodus chapter 25, verses 8 and 9. And we need to read that whatever God instructed Moses to make, it was supposed to be according to the pattern that he has shown him. So there is an original up in heaven. There is an original up in heaven. And the question is, which is that original? Which is that original? That's the question. Let me help you make some connections. And I'll let you wrestle with those connections. What was in heaven initially? What was in heaven initially? If you go back to Ezekiel chapter 28, beginning in verses 13 and following, Ezekiel will tell you that there was a place called Eden, in which someone was made or was created. That was Lucifer. That Eden was also called a Mount of God by Ezekiel. And this is why Isaiah says that this Lucifer wanted to ascend to the highest place, wanted to establish his throne on the Holy Mount. Which Holy Mount? The same one that Ezekiel speaks of, that is also called Eden. When you read Daniel chapter 2, remember that after Daniel is looking and describing the image, that huge, colossal, then Daniel says, one stone is cast without human hands. Remember reading that? Where was the stone taken from in Daniel 2? Before it was cast without human hands to the earth and hit the statue and the feet, where was it cut from? From where? It was cut from a mountain. Where was the mountain? In heaven. So far, so good? Are you making connections? Now, do you understand why then in Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, God clearly says, through Moses, God clearly says that God, the Lord God, planted a garden in Eden, in the east. And then he put man inside the garden. Why does it say that God planted the garden? Anyone knowing, having just a very basic knowledge of farming, will know what planting is. Planting clearly tells you something wasn't there and you're putting it there, right? So if God is planting the garden, it's because the garden wasn't there before. He's bringing it from heaven down to earth. And when man sinned, he was removed. And before the flood, it was taken up to heaven again. You follow the whole process? So when you look at what's going on, now this is where Jesus, when he ascended up to heaven, he entered to begin that work. Now, here's one thing that Daniel 8 doesn't tell us. Daniel 8 describes everything up to here, up to the little horn activity. But when it comes to the sanctuary, there is an explanation. The angel stops right there. The angel stops right there. Number one. Number two. From these 2,300 days, evenings and mornings, the angel does not give us any starting point. That's all left blank. And Daniel is sick. But there is one thing that the angel or Daniel does for us in chapter 8. And that is, he introduces two words. And I want you to know those words. One is the word hazon, and the other one is the word maret. For the first time, Daniel gives us those two words. And they're going to help us understand. Then, why is it that the angel stopped here and did not do anything with the last part until later? What do they mean? What do they mean? Both of them translate. Both of them translate vision. But there is a distinction. The reference is about the whole thing. In Daniel, when it refers to the whole entire vision, then hazon is used. When it refers to the entire thing, everything that was presented, from the ram all the way to the sanctuary, it refers to by the usage of the term hazon. Whenever it refers to the cleansing of the sanctuary and the 2,300 days, then mare is used. So when you go back to chapter 8, let me give a precise reference. Chapter 8. Whenever you go back to chapter 8, beginning in verse 16, well, actually, beginning in verse 15. Beginning in verse 15. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision. Which word? Hazon, the whole thing. Okay? That suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. What is that one? Mary? Why only this one? Because Daniel had already understood everything else. All that he was lacking was what? This part right here. Are you following? But then, Daniel couldn't take it anymore, and you will read in verse 26. And the vision, verse 26. And the vision of the evenings and mornings. Which is that one? The Mared. Which was told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision. Which vision? The whole thing. This part is true. Seal the whole thing. Why? Because it's incomplete. So, to be continued. In that part too, will be true. Will I be able to see you tomorrow? We're going to see in Daniel 9 how this work will then help us begin understanding this was supposed to take place. Because all that we read is that they had to wait until 2,300 evenings and mornings, and the sanctuary will be cleansed. But then when was that supposed to begin? Daniel 8 doesn't tell us. He got sick. He couldn't get it anymore. He had to wait a few years for the return of Gabriel to explain to him. And then we will have a starting point. And then we're going to see why it was important to understand that starting point before they will be able to understand the ending point, which is the cleansing of the sanctuary. Let me pause for a moment. My time is up, and yours is down. Is there a question? Any other question? Am I sending you home cleared, or am I sending you home confused, uncleared? This is a process. Because what we're going to see now, why is it that there is no symbol for king here? Because the vision of Daniel 8 did not end in Daniel 8. Continues in chapter 9. Continues in chapter 10. Continues in chapter 11. The next time that the word kingdom is mentioned in connection to the heavenly kingdom is in chapter 12. Which means that Daniel 9, 10, 11, and 12 basically complement. And it's the rest of the vision of Daniel 8. This is the reason why there is no symbol here. Because God is not finished yet. He will a little later, not just now. Okay. Any questions? Please. Yes. Exactly. Yes. He will deal with it. Exactly. Now, keep in mind, why is it that we have the same symbol for two different powers? Pagan Rome and papal Rome. Why? Because both powers basically accomplished the same work. There's no difference between the two. Pagan Rome destroyed the temple and persecuted Christians. Papal Rome attempted to destroy God's temple, which is his people. And he persecuted God's people. Similar activities. And this is why they're represented by the same power. And this is why I mentioned to you, Rome did not stop in 467 AD. Rome continued in the person or in the entity of papal Rome. There is a continuation. Exactly. And it develops from there. Exactly. And actually, you're going to see here that in order for Persia to become the master of the world, it had to defeat Babylon. In order for Greece to become the master of the world, had to defeat Persia. In order for Rome to become the master of the world, had to defeat Greece. But guess what? Papal Rome became the master and didn't have to fight for it. It was just delivered. It was granted. It was given. So there is a distinction. So there is a continuation. And this is what Daniel is helping us see. Okay? Yes, please. Okay. Let me say, Eden is in heaven. Wherever heaven is, that's where Eden is. I can tell you. I mean, which corner of heaven? Yeah. No. Let me help you a little more. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Of course. Here's the challenge. Yeah. Huh? Are you coming tomorrow? Then tomorrow? No. Well, actually, let me tell you. When you look at the scriptures, beginning with Ezekiel 28:13, Eden was in heaven. That's where Lucifer was created. That's where Lucifer was cast out from when he sinned. So you got to read Ezekiel 28:13 all the way to 17. Okay? Then you read in Genesis 2:8, God planted the garden on earth. So it was transported from one place down to earth. And according to Ezekiel, it was taken from heaven down here. The only other time that Eden is mentioned on earth is in chapter 4 of Genesis, when Cain moved from the east, moved away from the garden. Then Eden is no longer mentioned as being on earth anymore after that. However, you go back to Ezekiel, and you read beginning in chapters 42, I think, all the way to 47, and you're going to see a description of the Garden of Eden one more time in heaven. Okay? But then the best evidence that you can get, best biblical evidence that you can get, is in Revelation. Chapters 21 and 22. Okay? In 21, verses 1 and 2, John saw new heavens and new earth. Verse 2, then he says, I, John, saw the new Jerusalem coming down, adorned as a bride for her husband. And then while he was looking at the new Jerusalem coming down, he heard a voice. Behold, the tabernacle of God. And he will dwell with his people, and his people will be, and the people will be his people, and he will be their God. Now the question is, what is it that John saw? Did he see the new Jerusalem, or did he see the tabernacle? What is it that he saw? Because he says, I saw the new Jerusalem, and then I heard a voice. Well, the new Jerusalem and the tabernacle are one and the same thing. Okay? Then, John is very curious. And so he likes to take peeks inside the city. Okay? And then he sees golden streets, a golden plaza, gates made out of pearls and all precious stones. But then in chapter 22, verses 1 and 2, he sees inside the city, in the middle of a city, what does he see? A river flowing. Where do you read about a river coming through or flowing through the middle of? Okay, and then the tree of life on either side. Where do you read that from? Genesis chapter 2. Yes. So now, putting all three together, New Jerusalem, Tabernacle of God, Garden of Eden, one and the same thing. Now I can RIP, huh? No, not really. It's only while he was there and the people were there. But once the people left, it is no longer mentioned as a dwelling place for God. That's chapter 1. Well, it's an allusion to one of the places of the sanctuary. Yeah. Now, here's another thing, Priscilla. Here's another thing that you want to check. When you look at the Garden of Eden, in the Garden of Eden, there is no separation between holy place and most holy place. Why not? There is no sin. There is no sin. But then you look at the sanctuary, and it has a holy place separated by a veil from the most holy place. Why is that separation? because there is sin. When you go to the New Jerusalem, now the New Jerusalem is called the Tabernacle of God. Okay? But when John is taking his peeks inside the city, he says in chapter 21 that he didn't see a temple inside the city. And so some individuals have come to say, oh, there will be no temple in heaven. The problem is that they forget, or maybe they're not reading their Bibles in the original language. The word temple that appears there is this word. Naos. And whenever you read naos in the writings of John and in the book of Hebrews, it's always a reference to the most. So, John saw the tabernacle, most holy place. Why not? No separation, no sin. So, basically, sin is a parenthesis that is opened in the beginning and that God closes to resume activities. Yeah. So, and that's what I'm looking forward to. And that's what God has for all of us. And this is why God is taking the time to help us understand all of this. Because the ultimate goal is be able to make it to that place where we will be able to see God face to face, where He will remove every tear from our faces, and there will be no more sin, no more problems. That's what I'm looking forward. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Pastor. Correct. Removing that partition wall, that separation, so that God and man, once again, will come back in one relationship, like it was at the very beginning. Exactly. Exactly. Meant says, be back again in one. Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord continue guiding us. And look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I don't know, tomorrow will be for worship service, I imagine. Or I don't know if there will be a specific time. Anyways, I'll be here tomorrow. So I'll be looking forward to seeing you all. And we'll continue expanding on this concept. God bless.